much to celebrate and to be grateful for today. It's beautiful to do baptism together. We've had 7 people, or we're going to have 7 people baptized over the course of this weekend, and we just celebrate that. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing to do together as a church. A couple of days ago, I was talking to Dane, our 5-year-old, and my 5-year-old, our 5-year-old, not our 5-year-old, you know what I mean? But I was telling him about what we were doing this weekend. He'll often ask me, what's going on at church? What's going on in big church, Dad? And so I was telling him, buddy, this weekend we're going to do baptism. And he said, well, what's baptism? I said, well, baptism is essentially when somebody's decided to follow Christ and they want to make that public, that they've been forgiven for their sins and they want to go in a different direction. We just sort of celebrate that together. And so he said, well, that's really cool. A couple hours later, Dane got in trouble for hitting his brother. And so I went in his room to talk to him about it, and I said, buddy, what do you think your punishment should be for hitting your brother? And he said, Dad, I think I need to be hypnotized for my sins this weekend. And so I don't know what we teach in our children's ministry, but if you've been baptized and it didn't work, after church in the parking lot, we'll be hypnotizing people for their sins, and we'll try it, man. Try anything. We're beginning a new series together called Ebenezer. We're going to explain what that means in just a few moments, but we're kicking off, not just as a church, but as a nation, really, this week, or this week really marks the beginning of the holiday season. This is the first week where you start to hear Bing Crosby on the radio, every other song. This is the first week, and this week, the week of Thanksgiving, is the weirdest week of the year to me. And it's not because I don't love Thanksgiving, I do. Thanksgiving's my favorite. It's like Christmas without all the pressure. It's just beautiful. But it's so bizarre to me that we have this day marked on the calendar where we, kids don't go to school, we take off work, and we get together with our family and friends, and we say thanks for all the things that we have. And then the very next day, for crying out loud, we throw elbows and fight each other pursuing things that we don't have. I mean, if you were a group of aliens just kind of watching this, you'd be like, those people are weird, man. It's just a bizarre week. And so I want to spend a few weeks, Pastor Harry and I are going to spend a few weeks talking about how do you practice gratitude? Because in my experience, this is true whether you're a Christian or not, every single person in this room, when it comes to somebody else, you expect gratitude. It's because you value it, whether you're Christian or not. We all value gratitude. We want it demonstrated in somebody else. You even want it demonstrated in strangers. When you get the door for somebody, you want them to say thank you. When you let somebody merge in front of you on the 15, if they don't even give you like a little wave, there's that thing in you. Did they just expect that I was going to do that for them? I mean, there's just this thing, whether you're a Christian or not, where we all value gratitude and we all expect gratitude in somebody else. In fact, for some of us, that's the issue you have with a son or a daughter. In fact, you've questioned, did I raise them poorly because they just never seem to be thankful? You bought a cell phone for them, or you helped them with a down payment for a house, or you gave them some money somewhere along the way, and they never said thank you. And you even told them, you even said, now I don't expect anything in return. But you lied, didn't you? You wanted them to say thank you because we expect gratitude in other people. And so we place a premium on it. We value it. Every single one of us, we value gratitude. But the reason this series is so important is because very rarely have I met an individual, and this is true for me. Somebody told me a long time ago, if you preach from your weaknesses, Jared, you should never run out of material, which has been true for me. And this is not one of those things that I do well. I expect gratitude in other people, but very rarely in my own life, or very rarely do I see in other people, there's a practice or a habit or a way, a rhythm of developing gratitude in our own character and in our own life. Instead, we kind of throw pithy little phrases at it. Well, gratitude's an attitude, or I'll even tell my kids, you should be thankful, as if gratitude is something that can be commanded. It's not. It's something that has to be cultivated from deep in our souls, which is why in the scriptures, you see God over and over again begging, asking, telling people to cultivate the habit and the practice of gratitude. And so this is all throughout the scriptures. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about what does it mean to practice gratitude and to begin to develop that cultivate that as a practice, a habit, a rhythm in our life. Does that sound good to everybody? That's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. Sound good? All right. Thank you. Okay, Psalm 136 is where we're going to begin. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screens, or you can download the CRB app. That's a great place to follow along as well. Psalms is right in the middle of the scriptures. A guy named David, who's the king of Israel, one of the most powerful men in the world, has written a majority of the Psalms. And this is essentially, when you're reading the Psalms, oftentimes it's like you're eavesdropping in on David's journal, his private diary. And he's just, oftentimes, he's just carving out space to say thanks to God. This is one of my favorite of the Psalms. But notice, he's writing it down. Psalm 136, verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods. His love endures forever. You could almost sing this. It's lyrical. I'm not going to do it. Don't worry. Nobody would say thank you if I did. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. His love endures forever. David, one of the most powerful men in the world, is stopping. And he knows, he understands, and this is why God commands gratitude over and over again in the scriptures, because nobody in this room, certainly nobody in the ancient world, was just going to drift into an attitude of gratitude. It's something that has to be practiced. It's something that you have to begin to develop. And so for David, it's with the paper. Taking a pen and beginning, papyrus would probably be the more accurate thing for David, but he's with the pen, he's writing down his gratitude to God. Somebody told me years ago that I should journal, and as a kid growing up, I thought that's what spiritual people did, so I tried it, and it didn't work for me, but it's a great habit if you're like the kind of person that can write your thoughts down, and it's a beautiful thing just to stop and just to remind yourself of the things that you have to have gratitude for with paper. Sometimes it's with the paper that the psalmist or God's commanding that we give thanks. There's an ancient Jewish prayer. It's called the Amida. In fact, on the count of three, let's all say Amida together. 1, 2, 3. Amida. It's a Jewish prayer. It's part of Jewish liturgy. And the reason we talk about Jewish history here a lot is because this is the world that Jesus lived in. This Amida prayer, this is something Jesus would have prayed regularly. The Amida prayer, although it's not in Scripture, it's certainly something in the first century world ancient Jews would have practiced. And even to this very day, the Amida is just the Amida means a standing prayer. And what they would do 3 times a day, 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. You'll often see in the scriptures, the disciples were at the temple or the synagogue for the hour of prayer. This is what they were doing when they were in there. They would cite the Amida. It was 18 stanzas, 18 verses. You would go in a synagogue, you would go in the temple, you would, if you didn't have access to one, you would stand where you were and you would face Jerusalem 3 times a day. And it was a way to practice with paper through liturgy, a sense of gratitude for who God is and what God has done. This had been written down 450 years before Jesus was born. Nehemiah, Ezra, when they consecrated the temple, the very first temple, the Amida, this prayer of gratitude. And so for 450 years when Jesus was born, deep in their blood, deep in their tradition was this idea, we give thanks for all things to God. It was a practice. There wasn't just sort of this, if you get to it, you'll eventually drift into an attitude of gratitude. No, you practice it. These are just some lines. I'm not going to read all 18 of them, but just I chose a few from the Amida. This is how it would begin. God of history, blessed are you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers. Everybody would have this memorized. It's unbelievable. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, bless you. And the God, you didn't even say thank you. For crying out loud. Just kidding. She's not coming back. Okay, the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, the great, mighty, and revered God, the most high God who bestows loving kindness. This is from the middle of it, prayer for understanding. You would say this 3 times a day. You favor men with knowledge and teach mortals understanding. In other words, God, if anybody knows anything, it is only because in your infinite wisdom you have revealed knowledge to men. And we say thank you for all things. This is how the Amida ends. May it please you to bless your people Israel at all times and every hour with your peace. Blessed are you, O Lord, who blesses his people Israel with peace. It's the Amida. 3 times a day, 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., this is deep in your tradition, you would stop and you would stand and you would give thanks to who God is, because gratitude has to become a practice. Sometimes it's with the paper in the scriptures. Whether writing it down or reading it, you give thanks. It's a practice. You see at other moments in scriptures, it's not with the paper, it's with stones. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Joshua chapter 4. Joshua chapter 4, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua chapter 4. It's in the Old Testament. Now, the Israelites have been wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. We've talked about this extensively. They get to the end of this journey. It's no longer Moses who's leading the people. It's now a guy named Joshua. And Joshua is about to lead the people. There's probably 100,000 or so Israelites. They're about to cross into the homeland, or Israel, where they are to this very day. And they encounter the Jordan River. They have to get on the other side of the Jordan River somehow, which is this raging river, in order to get into Israel. And so God parts the river for them, which is interesting because the journey begins with the parting of the Red Sea. It ends with the parting of this river, and the people walk across. And they stand on the other side of the riverbank, about to enter into their new homeland. And God says, wait a minute. Don't just move past this moment. I want you to mark the moment. And notice what he commands Joshua and the Israelites to do. Joshua chapter 4, starting in verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the other side of this river, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe. So there's, you can think of Israel like a nation, and there's 12 tribes or 12 states. Pick somebody from each of the states or tribes and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, from right where the priests are standing, from the priestly tribe. This is the Levites. That's a particular, like a state or tribe that is a part of the people of God, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So carry these stones with you. I imagine they were quite heavy, large stones. So Joshua called together the 12 men that he'd appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and he said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord. And this is the Ark of the Covenant. If you've been hanging around church for a while, maybe you've heard that phrase before. The Ark of the Covenant was something that had been with the Israelites since the very beginning of their journey out of Egypt. And it was a sign, it was a reminder, it was essentially like a giant chess that God was with them. It contained in their worldview, this was the presence of God was with them when you had the Ark of the Covenant. And so he says, I want you to take the Ark of the Covenant, this would be risky, into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone. The waters have been parted. Take up a stone on his shoulder. So pick up some stones according to the number of tribes of Israelites, so 12, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? I want you to tell them that the flow of the Jordan River was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood, and there they are to this day. I love that. The tendency that we all have is to say, thanks God for doing a miracle. Thanks for answering that prayer. Thanks for, we couldn't have done this without you. But God says, wait a minute, do not move past this moment. And so sometimes it's with the paper they practice gratitude. Sometimes it's with the stones. And they build a monument to God's faithfulness right there in the middle of where they're going to sleep that night. And this is to be a reminder when your children ask, these stones are there to tell people that God, I'm not having a lot of luck. These stones are heavy, man. I told him to get fake ones. I need Nate. He's like Reverend Biceps up here. You thought you were going to get away with that hot tub crack earlier? No. The 12 stones are there as a way to say to future generations, God did something here. God helped us. God intervened. I want you to mark the moment. What a bizarre God. What a bizarre thing to do. I want you to remember what I did for you. Imagine if you and I went to lunch and I bought your lunch and you said, Jared, I really appreciate you buying my lunch. I said, thank you. Is that it? No, I want you to go to the parking lot and I want you to find 12 stones and I want you to build a monument to this lunch that I bought for you. I mean, that would be, you're crazy. What are you talking? What a bizarre thing that God would command a practice of gratitude. In fact, you see this all throughout the scriptures. Sometimes it's with the paper, write it down. Sometimes with the stones. Mark the moments where I did something on your behalf. Why would God do that? I think this is the reason. And when you see these moments in the scriptures, that this is essentially the reason. Because he says, I want you to do this, not just for your sake, but for your children's sake. I think all of us in this room, and this is sort of the whole point, in case you fall asleep or in case you already fell asleep, just wake the person up next to you. Every single one of us in this room, you will find yourself in moments, maybe you find yourself there in the present, where you're standing on the edge of a riverbank. And it might be in terms of your relationships, it might be in terms of your marriage. God, I need you to do something to get me to the other side. It could be financially, it could be spiritually, it could be in terms of a job situation. God, I need you to do something. I need you to part the waters because I don't know how this is going to work out. And I think the reason God wants us to mark the moments of his faithfulness is because when we find ourselves in the present, it is easier to trust God in the present moments of our lives. It's easier to trust God in the present and in the future when we have a practice of remembering his faithfulness to us in the past. Because I would be willing to bet if you thought back, maybe you don't remember, but there were moments in your journey with God, there have been moments along the way where you have found yourself, maybe it was 20 years ago, maybe it was 40 years ago, where you were on the edge of a riverbank in your marriage. And you needed God to do something and to intervene in terms of your relationship with your kids, in terms of getting pregnant, in terms of whatever it was. You needed a miracle. You needed God to do something. And our tendency is just to kind of walk past those moments and to not mark the moments and to not, we might say a prayer of thank you or God, that's great. But we'll find ourselves, every single one of us in this room, you will find yourselves in circumstances that are similar in the present and in the future. And it's easier to trust God in the present. And it's easier to trust God in the future when you and I remember his faithfulness to us in the past and we mark the moments. Sometimes it's with paper. Sometimes it's with stone. But God says, I want you to remember my faithfulness. Every single one of us in this room, we're great at forgetting. You can't even remember your wife's phone number. But we're terrible at remembering, especially when it comes to God's faithfulness. And we'll find ourselves in a riverbank moment again going, God, I need you to do something. I need you to show up. And the more we remember, whether through paper or stone, marking the moments of his faithfulness to us in the past, it's easier to trust him in the present. And it's easier to trust him in the future. And so you see the Israelites over and over again. Sometimes God commands it, other times they just do it. But you see this in 1 Samuel chapter 7. The Israelites, they're a nation at this particular moment. And they find themselves facing the Philistines. Those are the Goliath people. And the Philistines are a much mightier army than the Israelites are. They have iron technology. They have weapons that the Israelites don't have access to. And so they keep beating down the Israelites. And finally, on a battlefield one particular day, the Israelites have a victory against the Philistines. And the battle's not over. They don't know what's going to happen. But you see Samuel, who's a prophet. Essentially, he's if you read the scriptures, he's like David's personal prophet. But you see Samuel on the battlefield. He marks the moment, 1 Samuel 7, verse 12, of God's faithfulness. He says this, then Samuel took a stone, and he set it up between Mizpah and Shen. And he named the stone Ebenezer, saying, thus far, the Lord has helped us. He names the stone. He takes a stone. Sometimes it's with the paper, and sometimes it's with the stone. They stop and they give thanks to God for who he is and what he's done. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. Ebenezer. Thus far, God has helped us. Ebenezer. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The war's not over, by the way. We don't know what God's going to do. But thus far, as we look back, we see the hand and the sign of God's faithfulness. And we need to set some stones down. Ebenezer. Maybe the question is, how do you Ebenezer in your life? How do you mark the moments of thus far God has helped me? It seems like every single week here at CRB, I meet somebody in one of our recovery ministries, or I meet somebody coming to CRB from Alcoholics Anonymous, and oftentimes they will walk up and they're holding a chip. And sometimes it just says sober 24 hours, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's a year. But essentially what they're saying when they show me that chip is Ebenezer, thus far, the Lord has helped me. How do you mark the moments of God's faithfulness and his demonstrated kindness to you? If we don't have rhythms, if we don't have practices through paper and through stone of marking the moments, we will walk past those moments and find ourselves in situations in the future going, I don't know if God's going to come through. But the more that we remember, the easier it is to trust God in the present and in the future. How do you Ebenezer? How do you find ways to say, thus far, the Lord has helped me? And you see this in the scriptures. God commands this over and over again. God is saying throughout the scriptures, I mean, it seems petty when you think about it, that God would say, hey, you need to give thanks to the Lord. Hey, in all things, you need to celebrate. In all things, you need to give gratitude to God. I mean, this is all throughout the Old Testament. It's all throughout the New Testament. It's a bizarre thing. I think the reason why God does that is because if you're anything like me, and this is true whether you're a Christian or not, our heart does not naturally drift to gratitude, does it? Our heart, if your heart is anything like mine, it will naturally drift into expectation. Our heart, this is true in any relationship that you're in, our heart will not naturally drift into gratitude unless we practice it for who God is and what God has done. This is true for anybody. We will not naturally drift into gratitude. We will naturally drift into expectations for God and for other people. Let me give you a couple of examples of how that works. One in terms of physical health. A few weeks ago, Dane, our 5-year-old, came home from kindergarten with some kind of feverish ailment. Kindergarten's like a petri dish, by the way. And he comes home, and how this works in our house is I always get it. I get the fever. I'm like the first line of defense to absorb all the toxins and germs from our kids. And I'm the worst when I'm sick. I don't know about you, but if my temperature is like a half degree above 98.6, it's like I'm in bed. I mean, I think it's because doctors have diagnosed me as a guy. And as men, we have a terrible threshold for pain. And Rosanna will find me, in the room, and she's like, Jared, are you okay? I'm like, don't call me Jared. I'm Job today, honey. I mean, this is bad, She's like, can I do anything for you? But honey, you don't understand pain like this. And don't ever say that. I have given birth to 3 children. You do not understand pain. But I finally got well, went to the doctor, got some medicine, and felt better. And I realized when I got well, I never stop and give thanks. I don't stop regularly. I do not have this sense of gratitude for health. I have an expectation that I'm gonna wake up and, fever's sitting right there at 98.6. I mean, that's just an expectation. And unless you practice it and waking up and saying, God, I just wanna take time to say thank you for the things that I've just taken for granted, you will naturally drift into expectation. You will not naturally drift into gratitude. This is true in relationships. This is true in marriage. And for some of us, I mean, this is the whole tension that you have in your marriage right now, is that she never says thank you. He never says thank you. And you find yourself, the way that this plays itself out in your marriage, you've drifted not into gratitude for each other, you've drifted into expectations for each other. Unless you practice it, it just doesn't happen. For some of us, I mean, your frustration is, your husband, he comes home from work and you've worked your whole day as well, and you somehow figured out how to get food on the table and homework done for the kids, and your husband walks in the door and he never says thank you for any of it. And the reason he never says thank you is because he expects it. I'm getting beaten up today in the parking lot. He expects it. He just expects it. In fact, if you do not have a regular rhythm or a regular pattern in your marriage or in a relationship with somebody that you love or with somebody who does something for you on a regular basis, if you do not have a habit or a practice of demonstrating gratitude, it's not because that person doesn't do anything for you, it's because you just expect them to do something for you. And in that kind of an environment, and this is true in our relationship with God as well, in that kind of an environment, we only notice when expectations are not met. I'm one of the worst is this as a guy, I'll come home from work and, Rosanna works and does her thing and gets the kids' homework done, all that. And when I walk in the house, I very rarely will I stop and say, thank you. I don't know how you did all this. But when an expectation isn't met, when there's not food, there's toys are on the table, of course we notice that. You'll notice when expectations are not met. You'll focus on that with a laser-like focus when expectations are not met. And the same is true in our relationship with God. We'll just kind of take and take and take. But when all of a sudden an expectation for something that we just took for granted isn't met, that is when often we will find ourselves extremely frustrated or angry at God because an expectation that we had that maybe we never even communicated was not met. And the reason God commands gratitude, the reason God says, I want you to practice, whether through paper or stone, is because God does not want the same kind of relationship with you that I have with my mortgage company. I have noticed when it comes to my mortgage company, in all these years of paying mortgage, I have never gotten a thank you note from my mortgage company. Not one time. I'm pretty faithful to send the money, but I have never gotten a thank you note. I've never opened up an envelope that smelled like perfume, from my mortgage company. No thank you notes from my mortgage company. You know why? Because they expect that I'm going to pay. If I want special attention from my mortgage company, you know what I need to do? You don't pay, right? And then all of a sudden, I will get all the special attention I want. I've noticed they will call you. If you need them, I've noticed if I call my mortgage company, I can't get them on the phone. I mean, I will call and, representative into the phone over and over again. But if I fail to meet their expectation, they're so nice, they will send somebody to my house. And they will focus on that failed expectation. And oftentimes, we treat God that way. Like we're the mortgage company and he owes us, and we only give God attention in the moments when expectations are not met. And there's certainly nothing wrong with having expectations for God. But when those are the moments where we give God the most attention, and what if with that same intensity we gave God thanks for who he is and what he's done? And when we practice gratitude, whether through paper or stone, it's a way of declaring, God, you don't owe me anything. It's a way of declaring, God, this breath that I just took, God, the shoes on my feet, the car that I drive, the talents that you've given me, the children that we have, God, all of this is a gift from you. And it carves out this space in your heart to begin to actually have perspective and actually begin to give thanks. What if you began to practice gratitude? Because nobody will drift into an attitude of gratitude unless we practice gratitude. I don't know what that looks like for you, but I have a feeling for all of us in this room, if you really thought about it, if you really stood back from the busyness of life, you would admit that you're incredibly grateful. I mean, if you just thought about the people in your life, if you just thought about the things in your life, I mean, you would be, goodness gracious, I mean, I have so much to be grateful for. All of us in this room. The reason why you don't practice gratitude is not because you're not grateful, it's because you're busy. And it actually takes time to begin to write it down. It actually takes time to find a way to mark the moment of God's faithfulness. And the discipline of practicing gratitude, it will cost you ounces, but the regret of not practicing gratitude will cost you pounds, because you will find yourself over and over again. It's incredibly difficult to trust God unless you remember his faithfulness and mark the moments with paper or stone of what he's done and who he is. I don't know what that looks like for you. I don't know how you begin to do that. I've been asking people for the last couple of weeks, how do you practice gratitude in your life? And I've gotten some great feedback. One friend of mine, he said, you know what we do in our house? He said, we have a gratitude jar. It sits on the kitchen, right next to the kitchen table, and there's a notepad next to it and some little sheets of paper that our kids and my wife can tear off, and we just write down things that we're grateful for, and we stick it in the jar. And he said, you can watch that jar just fill up and fill up and fill up. I said, how often do you open? He said, every year, once a year, we open our gratitude jar. I said, are there any rules for what you put in the jar? He said, there's only one rule. It has to be something specific. You can't just put in there, God, I'm thankful for the cat. You know, you have to, nobody's ever thankful for cats anyway. So lame. You got to write down, like, mom was busy at work and she dropped everything to pick me up because I forgot something and she came to the school. You got to mark the moment. You got to actually be specific. And we write in there things, when prayers are answered, put it in the gratitude jar. When somebody's done something for us that we didn't, you put it in the gratitude jar. And he said at the end of the year, we just dump that out on the table around New Year's, around Christmas time, and we just read through it, and it reminds us of how much we have to be grateful for. He said it's like a reverse fortune cookie. Instead of saying these are the things that are going to happen, we look back at all the things that have happened and we mark the moments through paper. How do you mark the moments? I have another friend who, he said in his marriage, he said we were having some problems, and one of the problems was that I was not communicating my emotions very well. I know that's hard to believe that a man couldn't communicate his emotions, but he said, I'm already getting beaten up today, so... He said, so what we decided to do, he said, we got a moleskin journal and it stays on a nightstand. And oftentimes it's hard to actually sit down with each other and say, hey, I'm grateful for this, or I'm grateful for this. But what we do is we'll just, in this moleskin journal, it's just kind of a running conversation between the two of us where we don't speak, we just write. And he said, we'll just write down, I'm thankful that you know, X, Y, Z, and she'll write down. And he said, when we find ourselves in marriage, and they've been doing this for years, he said, when we find ourselves in a crisis or we find ourselves angry at each other, now we go back and we have stacks of moleskin journals that remind us of all that we have to be grateful for. How do you practice gratitude in your life? Sometimes it's with the paper. Sometimes it's with the stone. This church has done some amazing things this year. 18,760 lives impacted because of your generosity. And this impact guide is just a way for us to Ebenezer. It's a way for us to say, man, this year, thus far, the Lord has helped us. God has done something significant in this place. This is our way just to Ebenezer together. Because there are moments as a pastor, there are moments for many of you that are deeply involved in this church where you go, wait a second, you know, is God going to help us in this situation, in this circumstance as a church? And just to have this on paper, just to remember, this is a way to Ebenezer. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but thus far, the Lord has helped us. How do you Ebenezer? How do you mark the moments of God's faithfulness in your life personally? They're happening. Milestones are coming and going all the time. And the way that we usually say it is we'll go, I can't believe I'm old enough to insert stage of life here. I mean, you said that when you got to 6th grade. I can't believe I'm old enough to be in 6th grade. I can't believe I'm old enough to be a grandparent. I mean, we say that all the time. And what we're essentially saying is, I can't believe all these milestones have accumulated. How do you mark those milestones when they pass? Do you stop? Do you breathe? Is there a sense of Ebenezer? Thus far, God has helped us. It doesn't have to be anything expensive or elaborate. In our house, we Ebenezer through the star pan. The star pan is our way of just celebrating moments and milestones. And it's not expensive. I think it came from like the dollar section at Bed Bath & Beyond, or I think it was in the Beyond section, actually. Such a lame joke. When there's somebody going into kindergarten, when there's somebody's birthday, when there's somebody who's got something to celebrate, we get the star pan out. And I always put pineapple upside down in mine, and you bake a cake, and it's just a way as a family to gather around the table and say, when the star pan comes out, something significant has happened. Ebenezer. Ebenezer? How do you mark the moments in your life? How do you have moments of saying thank you to God, practicing gratitude? And the more you accumulate the stones, the more you accumulate the pages, the easier it is to trust God in the present, and the easier it is to trust God in the future. Let's pray together. God, as we enter into a season of Thanksgiving, as we enter into a season of holiday, as we enter into a season of Christmas, we sing it's the most wonderful time of the year. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's just the fastest time of the year where everybody's just moving past each other. And I just pray today, God, would we take a moment just to have a breath? It's all from you, God. As we sing this song that Will and Sally are going to lead us in, God, would you just deepen inside of us a sense of gratitude for the cross, deepen inside of us a sense of gratitude for our breath. God, we get laser focused on failed expectations. We get laser focused on things that aren't going our way. And when we just stop for a moment today and with paper, with stone, just say thank you. We declare your goodness to us, God. You have given us your Son. You have not withdrawn the cross from us, no matter what we do. God, you have shined light on us. You have not left us in the dark to our own devices. You have given us your Son. You have given us your Spirit. You have given us your words. We have so much to be thankful for. And God, I just pray today by the power of your Spirit, would you bring gratitude deep, not just commanded, but cultivated in us. And we give thanks today, God. We give thanks. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.